I'm excited to open this first panel with a discussion with these four really interesting artists who come from a variety of disciplines, but who all have really interesting and different aesthetic ideas. What we'll be talking about today is creative strategies. I wrote this book earlier this year, which is sort of tries to deal with some of these problems, how to get music made, how to get out of creative blocks. But I don't want to talk about the book. I want to talk about those ideas and how they are filtered through the experiences of these four artists. So we have Matthew Herbert, James Holden, Young Guru, and Phoebe Kiddo. And my name is Dennis DeSantis, and I'll be moderating all this. So I just want to start by throwing out a question to whoever wants it. Has there been a time in your career, or before you would say you became a professional, when you were stuck? And if so, how did you get out of that?
I get stuck, I'd say probably 6 to 8 times a day for my entire life about this stuff. In fact, I meant to look it up on Twitter because James Rhodes, the piano player, wrote this really brilliant little tweet about inspiration. And he said, I'm paraphrased really badly, but it's about discipline. And he said it's why he practices the piano 5-6 hours a day is because inspiration is so fickle, or because it's not there. And he did all this in 140 characters. That was better than I said. But his point was that actually you need to develop something entirely in parallel with inspiration, because it's so unreliable that you just have to, you have to develop something that allows you to work despite the lack of inspiration.
Phoebe, when we talked the other day, you talked about this word discipline and how you're doing this in your own creative practice as well. You want to expand upon your strategies?
Yeah, sure. I think most artists, professional artists, productive artists would agree that discipline's one of the most important aspects of work, because it's not always enjoyable. There's so many long, boring hours that you need to spend to complete a good work, and patience and perseverance are two of the most important characteristics that you need to develop and embody to stay with the work from the beginning to the end, and to see it through from the initial idea and to incubate and develop it until it becomes something good and meaningful.
But it's so interesting, this idea that you can admit that the work is boring, because I think for a lot of young producers there's this romantic notion of the creative artist as this constantly having fun. You've got a studio full of buttons and knobs and you're smiling the whole time, and oh, the art is so expressive. But you talked about meditation as a way of dealing with being bored.
I personally practice meditation because it helps me in my life in general, but also because it helps me be patient and see through things and get through the difficult parts of the process, which for me is really the detail and the end, really at the end of the process, listening to a song or and seeing what it needs and really seeing it through and taking the care and the time to finesse something. That last part, often I feel already bored of the music. So having a process that helps me, or a practice that helps me be disciplined enough to sit through that part, see it to the end and complete it, is really helpful.
Guru, it looks like you have something.
No, I totally agree with that. There's a part of it that for me is super creative, but then as an engineer and a producer, a lot of young engineers that I teach now sort of forget that this is a job. And when you're dealing with record companies and I always tell people, okay, we're about to get into the boring part of the studio, where I have to do all different passes where, I'm printing the main, the clean, the acapella, the instrumental, the vocal up, this version that they asked for. And I'm like, okay, you're gonna be bored. You're gonna hear this song probably 10 times. And then, hey, I gotta do the stems. So you're gonna sit here and listen to each individual part, by itself, But it is part of whatever your job is. So I kind of keep that in focus. Like, hey, you're getting paid to make music and make people feel good. So it's not that bad if you have to listen to this kick for like another 5 minutes by itself, you know? But I don't know if there's a point where I can't find inspiration. And when I get stuck, there's so many other things that I go to sort of get that inspiration. I can listen to other people's music. I can practice other forms of art. You know, to me, it's important for musicians to understand all forms of art so that you can understand your expression. So if I'm bored and I can't really get an idea, I'll go out and shoot photography, and it'll inspire me to come back and make music. So I kind of find inspiration in using my other senses, I guess you would say, and I stop listening for a second and I go see for a second and then come back to listening.
James, this leads to something that we talked about the other day, where a really interesting quote that you said was that you've got to think of something to learn between records, which is so interesting because I think a lot of producers feel like they make a record, it's mildly successful or very successful, and then they have to repeat this process as fast as possible to stay in the public eye. But you've taken a very different approach to this, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I've been lucky, but I left it 7 years between albums and got away with it. There's kind of, if you haven't learned something, you're the same person, so how are you going to make a different record? You haven't got anything new in your head to output. And kind of, when people do their first successful record, it's kind of their whole life up to that point distilled. And then they're trying to do a second album where nothing's happened apart from they've been on the road and got drunk and high a few times.
So what would be an example of how this process worked for you?
Like, I never really feel like I'm blocked, even though quite a lot of the time I have no inspiration to sit down at an instrument in the least. I just feel like I want to go in the studio, but I just want to learn something technical or learn another instrument or just listen to records, I guess. That's the...
And you don't worry about this publish or perish phase, that you'll disappear from the public eye, for example?
I mean, obviously it's in my mind. Yeah. And, you know, I get a text from my bank every week with the balance.
I think that's a huge point, though, of, I don't know, in my experience, number one, if you talk about like Jay-Z or somebody like that, you know, when we sit down in the studio, it's like, what topic haven't we talked about in all these years of making music? But it becomes a problem where when you're really successful with one thing, people think that you're going to do that exact same thing over and over again. So we kind of just try to go opposite of wherever we went last time. And that's the big thing. It's, you know, we're successful with this record called The Blueprint, and then like right after that, and it kind of changed where hip hop was at the time and like brought it back to this like core of sampling thing. So then right after that album, a bunch of producers started giving me beats that sounded exactly like The Blueprint. And I'm like, we're not gonna do that again. So just go completely opposite of what we just did, you know, that sort of thing. And then the living life thing is a really important part, because if you don't do that, then you won't have anything to draw from. And in the experience, that's sort of what has allowed us to remain true to ourselves, is just the truth of where you are at that given point in your life. So you get to see sort of the maturation of this person, you know, over a given time. And that truth is what allows you to really be you. And that means that you is going to change over time. So that's a problem that we were trying to correct, especially in hip hop music, where you have like 40-year-old guys that are still making music as if they're 18, you know? And we were like, no, now my life is about like my wife and my kid and something else. So like, I'm gonna make music about like, I hate paying these taxes and, you know, all this, but in a really cool way, you know? So you start to talk about your truth. Or we have a song called Off That, which is talking about just that, where it's like, hey, I used to do all these other things and I really understand you, 19-year-old, and why you do those things, but I'm off that. Like, I don't do that anymore. This is what I'm doing now as an adult. So it's just, you know, it's about remaining true to yourself and where you are. But if you don't have experiences, if you don't live life, if you just repeat what you did, then you won't be here that long, and you won't be that interesting of a person.
So Matthew, I wanted to ask you about, you know, we've heard a lot about progressing in your life and going through various phases and changing your process. But you're quite well known for having developed a manifesto of a technical process for working. How does this, and you still follow it to this day, right?
Yeah, I didn't for the last record, but for the most part, yeah. Like 90% of the work is done that way. But I think for me, it's a battle with yourself, where that's what Guru's talking about, which is about why am I doing this? What am I hoping to achieve from it? All the technical issues that you have to overcome. But also, there's a battle with the tools as well. And I think one of the worst instruments for me now is the piano, which I've played my whole life. But you sit down at the piano and you're just like, oh man, this is just every sort of, how many pieces of music have been written for the piano, you know? I don't have enough classical technique to just sit there and play, or jazz technique to just play there for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, hoping that something will come. And that issue has transposed itself into electronic music now, which is that when I started making electronic music in the 80s, the technology that we had was developed by people that didn't know what we were going to do with it. I just was on the train yesterday thinking about the Casio FZ1, which was my first sampler, and it had this little screen, and you could draw a waveform really clumsily. You could draw like a little picture of a house, and you'd play it, and it would always sound no matter what you drew, it would always just go But it was still kind of, oh, that's cool. And it had this function on the modulation wheel where you could scratch the sample. But it was a really terrible scratch. It sort of went, but again, it was just like, oh, that does that. And the designer was just like, I don't know, let's just do that over there. And then you can draw a thing over here, and there's a microphone in the back, and there's a line input in the back. And of course, the 808, the 909, the 303, these were designed, the 909 particularly was designed to replace a drummer, you know, to sound like a drummer. It sounds nothing like a drummer, and that's one of the things that's so good about it. And the 303, the amplitude, there's a fault with the 303, the way the amplitude filter works, which means that, which gave birth to acid house and things. And the thing now is that you buy a sampler now and it comes with 5 gigabytes of DVDs of all this stuff. And you open up Logic now and it says, you want to write hip hop, you want to write progressive house, you want to write singer-songwriter, you want to do this, you want to do this. I'm like, dude, just, you know, it's like shopping now. You're like, oh, I'll have a little bit of that and a little bit of that. And it's infantilized us, and it's totally, it's a complete battle, that stuff. So that's why I wrote a manifesto, was like, actually, I want to make the decisions about, for me, the composition starts before you turn the thing on.
There was a lot there. I want to open this. Is there anything in there that one of the three of you would like to address or counterpoint to?
Yeah, that you can turn all that stuff off. And it's so easy, you know, like, I look at it from so many different ways, because production and engineers, we sort of get excited at equipment and we're like, what can this do and what can it do? But I too come from that era of an SP12, and before I had a 1200, I had an SP12, and I had like 12 seconds of sampling time, hooked up with an Akai 950. And that was my start of making music. So the limitation is good. It allows you to be creative. You had to figure out ways of like making records with that amount of time. But having all this instant access, you know, to me is also good. All my old analog guys are like, oh, this digital is so crappy, it doesn't sound the same. And I'm like, are you kidding? Did you actually work in a studio during the analog time? Because I would have like 6 keyboards and then we go eat lunch and I'd come back and have to retune every keyboard. It sucked. Or I rarely had sessions where I had to change the battery on a clav and I didn't pull out the lead, and I'm telling the client, like, hold on, give me 5 minutes, I gotta solder this back together. To me, I love the fact that I can hit Command S and that everything sounds exactly the same. So, you know, creatively, it's about you controlling the machine. The machine only does what you tell it to do. So if you tell it, hey, I want to do this and I want to do that, but having the choice of having my swing from my SP1200 or the swing from my MPC, or hey, I don't even have to do that because now I can go online. There's a community of people who have already done all the swings. So I can go, okay, let me grab all of this stuff, you know? Or one of the best parts was when I was in Ableton and I'm doing my auto slice. I did the built-in slice for like forever because I didn't know there was all this other stuff. And then I one day was like, okay, what is this? And then there's like all these ways of slicing. I'm like, oh, people have done this and go on. It's very convenient and very fun and inspirational for just me sitting there for a day. I probably made 10 tracks based off of people's slicers. And I was like, this isn't the same sample, you know, sounds completely different. So I don't know, for me, the possibilities of the creativity allow me to be a lot better than to complain about it. I don't know, I like it.
James, it looked like you had some emotional response to that.
Like, in a way, having these options, like you can load up yesterday's project and it sounds the same. The point where I abandoned that option, I got unblocked and got a lot more work done because I would never bounce anything. I'd leave a million automation lanes still automating away, thinking, oh, I might need to adjust something later. I never would, but then Ableton's grinding to a halt because it's got 400 channels in it or whatever. And like creatively, just knowing like I've got to finish this because it's not going to work tomorrow. I've got to do a take. I've got to catch this feeling in the room. Actually, this feeling in the room is going to be gone whether I get a perfect digital recall or not tomorrow.
So how have you solved this problem to get yourself out of the total recall state? You switched to like a modular system.
Yeah, I don't really use any sound generating in the computer very much anymore. I mean, actually, I have some things which recall perfectly now, but it was good having that sort of process of writing that album in that way. Got me over that hump. And also like this philosophical change that we talked about on the phone, that now I only believe in recording things live, and I never sequence things or program or automate anything. And that just gets you out of spending a lot of time in the studio. You get something that works, you learn to play it, you record it, done.
And Phoebe, we talked a little bit about how your process involves building a repertoire of materials that you then mix and match.
Yeah,
right?
I have also a very live process for the same reason that things can go on infinitely. And I think having process is one of the most important things that, for me anyway, that's emerged from trying out different creative strategies, is setting a process and sticking to it and choosing the tools correctly and limiting them was really helpful to be able to create cohesive projects, cohesive albums, records. So I also like to perform and use some hardware, virtual hardware, because I really love very synthetic sounding things. So I might have tended toward like more of an analog or modular kind of way of going about things because I like the process of performance. But sonically, I prefer a cybernetic, very modern sound. So that means that I really like digital tools, but I want to use them in more of an analog way. So I've created a live system, so I perform my music live and they become the songs. So it goes in a reverse order to an engineer. And the last part of the process is the engineering, capturing and recording drums from a drum machine and synths from synthesizers into Ableton, for example, and creating the track. But that process of playing became really important to generate ideas and to not just make generic music. Like I think it can be really restricting in a way. And one of the most important and uncelebrated things I think about creativity is you need to be good at problem finding as well as problem solving. So you need to become good at asking the right questions to like create good work. So what are these tools actually doing for me and how are they working and how am I working with them? So that kind of thing can help, I think, overcome in the beginning phases of production where things maybe are generic because of the tools. You know, if you can find a process that overcomes that you feel comfortable with, that you can work quickly, I think the more quickly you can work is generally good for me anyway, because then you're capturing ideas quickly and you're generating more. And the more ideas you generate, the more likely you are to have some good ideas out of that larger pool of work.
This thing about finding the right questions to ask, I mean, I feel like for a young producer, they're mostly concerned about answers, right? They're like, what am I doing? How do I use these tools? What does this knob do? And maybe that's a situation where these kinds of presets offer a gateway, or templates offer a kind of, here's a thing you could do, here's a compressor and where it might normally go in the system. But you're talking about finding new questions, which I wonder, what would you say to a young producer who's like, oh great, now I have a whole nother level of things I have to think about?
The first part is learning the tools or whatever you're going to play, and that's primarily important. Like, you can't create a good song if you can't play an instrument, or you can't record or work with synthesizers or whatever. And the better you can get at your tools, the more easy it is to iterate different ideas. So I think becoming proficient even in a small amount of tools, often limiting them because there's so much available, to just choose a set and to have some parameters to the way that you work, and learning them well means that then you can start to be able to work with those tools. And the material itself, the sounds itself, the aesthetic qualities of the instruments that you choose, that itself will change the process. So as you start to create with a certain aesthetic, it will change as you go. So the work itself brings more ideas and brings more questions, or the sonic qualities and so on. So it's important first to know the tools, and then you can flow, you can work in a fluid manner. But then the work itself will start to bring in more questions and challenges. And I think the proficiency at a certain level first is really important.
So I want to bring that actually as a question to everyone on this panel. I mean, you could spend your whole life learning an instrument, for example, the piano, or a modular system, or a recording studio. You could spend an entirety of time digging deep into this stuff and actually find at the end of your life that you had never made any music, but you were like amazing at FM synthesis, for example. Is there, where do you draw the line between proficiency and...
Would that be a bad thing?
That's a question. I mean, if what you wanted to do was make records, I guess it would be a bad thing, right?
Right, it is.
Full stop, it is.
No, and I don't mean to cut you off, but if you understand your purpose, then it becomes very easy. So I am someone who does preach that you should learn your machine. Nowadays, I make like my students sit down and like, okay, you're gonna go over this synth for a week, and you're gonna try to master as much as you can of this synth. But at the end of that week, you have to make a piece of music, no matter where you are in your process. Because if you're not an engineer, like I understand that part of it, of us that love how things work, and I have musicians that don't care about that, and they want to make music, that's it. So sit down and make music with whatever you have, and you'll start to grow in your process, and you'll start to learn more things, and then that, when you get stuck, will become something that helps your creativity. Oh, I didn't know that it could do this, and I didn't know it could do that. And that little spark will help you, but let's not forget what we're here for. You're not here to just tinker with things. You're here to make music. And then as a music maker, you have to remember what is your reasoning? What are you servicing? Are you servicing your audience, or are you just servicing yourself? I want to make music for other people. Otherwise, just sit in my room and play it for me and my friends. But I know consciously that I want this to go out to the world, to give everyone the feeling. The majority of people that I'm playing my music for have no idea about the equipment. That's not their purpose, you know? So you have to get music out, and I think sometimes we forget that, or we as musicians have this problem committing. Like, I got the guitar sound. I could sit here and twiddle with it for 18 umpteen hours, but it sounds good. Just record it and let's move on. Am I getting my point across? It's that simple.
I feel like there were opinions generated on this couch regarding the technical proficiency question and where to draw the line, or if there's a line.
I think there's always a tension between proficiency and not knowing what the fuck you're doing. And I think there's a really sort of joyful part of the creative process, which is being on the edge of your abilities, you know? And so I agree about learning about the tools, but I also feel that there's something important, because we're talking about craft there, you know, and about the importance of your craft. But I also think there's something, some of the best music that I've ever, and some of the best people I've worked with, for me, have just done things I'm like, why are you doing that? They're like, I don't know any other way, you know, I haven't figured out any other way to do it. They've sort of had their own part of it. But one of the great unblockings is collaboration, you know, is playing it to somebody else and saying, what do you think? Because for me, it's about listening. So one of the hardest things when you're talking about stems, and all the mixes and the passes and things, actually one of the hardest things for all of that is actually you need to listen, and you need to listen again, and you need to keep listening, and you need to keep listening. You need to listen to every one of those kick drums and check that one of them hasn't distorted or clipped or peaked. So yes, it's intense. Yes, it's boring. Yes, it's relentless. And part of that relentlessness and part of the craft of it, this is what we're talking about, to do with craft, I think, as well, is about the need to constantly listen and re-listen and not switch off, and so sort of be engaged with the process. And of course, one of the best ways of doing that is with having somebody else in the room, particularly when it comes to writing. You see how they do things.
Did you have anything to add?
Yeah. Two things you've said, actually, Matthew. There's so much music already that, like, your book is so lovely and so supportive and helpful. In my head, I have the opposite book, and on every page it just says, "What's the point?" And then on the last page, there's a screenshot of the EDM category in Beatport or something. And just why? Like, there's so much music. Is this really worth polluting the pool with? And when you have a collaborator, you've kind of come together for a purpose, and that helps you sort of feel like, well, we might never meet again. That's the point of this. This happened. It's a recording of something that really happened. And that kind of gives it a purpose. It gets you over that hump. When I sit on my own and try and make solo electronic music, I think I have reached that point where I just feel like, Beatport's full. Or whatever.
And it's my favorite statistic that I always say about these things, so I apologize for saying it again, but I gave one of these talks a few years ago, and someone from Apple came to me and they said less than 75%, more than 75% of iTunes has never been downloaded once. And it's just, we need to accept that music is now a form of waste in the same form as food, and the same as food and clothes, and we're just sort of spewing it out and nobody's listening anymore. So that aspect of philosophy, what's the point? Or my tax return, or whatever it is, that the philosophy, like why writing it in the first place, becomes so important. Otherwise you're just plopping out waste.
So the moral of the story is making music is boring, and there's already too much of it. So hope you're inspired.
I sort of think if you overcome those two hurdles, you're there. Mm-hmm. You're probably making music. If in your head you've justified the existence of your recording, maybe some people will agree with you.
And you're still excited by it.
Yeah.
But that brings up an interesting point. Like, if the EDM category of Beatport is so completely saturated, why is there so much more music being fed into this machine?
Because the access is there, and it's a lot easier now to get into making music. So it's just there's no step, and there's positives and negatives to that. At the same time that we used to really sit there and go, oh, I hate the record company, and I hate the fact that I have to bow down to the radio jock and pay this guy money and all this other stuff that really did go on. We asked for this, and in the Jared Lanier, who's a designer, has a book that's great that explains this whole thing about how we sort of asked for the wrong things and we didn't know exactly what was going to come out of it. So if you want that freedom of being able to upload your song to the internet, you have to realize that everyone else is going to have that same access. So now the trick is to get above the noise, you know, because everyone is doing it. But at the same time, to me, it's still a really powerful thing of not having to bow down to a record company and playing this other game of how do I drive people to my website or to my, you know, to buy whatever it is I'm doing on iTunes, or that becomes a fun game for me, you know, I enjoy that part of it. And that if you don't understand that as a musician nowadays, then you're gonna kind of be lost. Like, you have to drive people to what you're doing and do something interesting.
I meant it from a slightly different perspective, though. Like,
okay.
What I meant, you guys were talking about this particular kind of music, which we've sort of taken for granted on the stage now.
But what is that? What is EDM? Like, there's so many titles. Anything that uses electronics and people dance to it, that's electronic dance music.
I think we're talking about this kind of. Go ahead and explain it, because you brought the word up.
I was just picking a straw man to attack.
But then I was going to play devil's advocate in defense of this straw man. Like,
but it applies to anything. Like, the easier something is to do, the less value it has. So if the Microsoft paperclip pops up when you open your sequencer and helps you write, you know, some hip hop or some house music or whatever, it's helping everyone else. That outcome has, well, not no value, but it becomes like folk practice. In the old days, people would buy an acoustic guitar and play folk songs or Beatles songs, and the acoustic guitar doesn't have a render to MP3 function. And that's the change. Some of this software is a folk instrument for doing something which is like so within a box. For me, I'm an egotist and a narcissist, so I don't really want that to be my output, folk practice. I want it something.
But I mean,
stupid.
I'm arguing for the validity of the 17-year-old who actually loves this music. This is the music they want to make.
Yeah, it's what they grew up on. So at the end of the day, I try to make it so that I'm like, okay, if this is what you want to make and you want to be different, then put away Massive. Don't use the same presets that everyone else is using. You know, my students, they come in and I see them just go to Massive and they're using presets. And I'm like, this is one of the best synths to program. There's so much stuff in here. Let me explain to you how this works so that you can do something different and come up with something different that'll make you stand out from everyone else. I'm always of that mindset of where everyone else is, go the opposite direction so that you can be, there's always this like triangle system of someone who starts the thing and then everyone else falls underneath of it. So go start your own triangle. You know, like that's the whole thing. Don't just copy what everyone else is doing. If this one stutter effect is the effect that everyone's using and the rises are the same, and like it all starts to sound exactly the same because people are using the same presets. Same thing with hip hop. You know, nowadays it's like, okay, we gotta kind of retire the 808 in this trap music and we gotta figure out something else to do because it's a 15-year-old kid has explained it well on YouTube and now everyone knows how to do it. So, you know, figure out something new to do. That was always the thing about our genre of music, was you had to be different. And now it's not that. It feels like it's how do you sound like the next person, or every kid wants to be like Drake and Future nowadays. And I'm like, okay, well, go be something else.
And Phoebe, what's your solution to be different?
I think what we talked about earlier about living life and taking in inspiration and learning things and having some aspect of yourself that isn't the music is super important, because that really feeds into it, and a lot of insight comes from outside of the actual craft itself, from other arts or experiences. One thing that's been really helpful for me is choosing like aesthetic preferences and defining those beforehand so that what I create sits in its own world, and making some slightly different choices from convention and so on. I do think it's important to like understand convention. I didn't believe that in the beginning as an artist, but you do need to know what the parameters are, and you do need to have some awareness of the world that you're putting music into for it to be meaningful to people. So knowing them and then breaking them is probably a good way to do it. And having an aesthetic preference for each, it doesn't have to remain the same throughout your whole career, but for each record, giving it a world and a space, and kind of honoring what that idea is or what that work is, and then trying to bring out its best qualities for me, has become a really effective process.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, this idea about being aware of the field. But if you, a sort of counterpoint to that would be, every 20 years or so, some ethnomusicologist finds a culture of music that's been completely isolated from the world. And it sounds like nothing anyone's ever heard before. And this is music that's made entirely in a vacuum, right? I mean, so there might be something to not knowing the field, if you were truly naive.
Yeah, actually, I do want to make a comment about naivety. Being someone like an early career artist sitting with so many experienced people, and what Matthew was saying earlier about this naivety and being on the edge, I think that is really a great place, and happy accidents and like really interesting things arise from the not knowingness and the discovery, whether it's with the tools or the process or whatever. And because of that, I think a lot of really interesting records, young producers' records, where they kind of didn't exactly know what they were doing and then kind of made something, but it was definitive, like totally definitive, and that's really great. So continuing to push yourself into new realms, whether it be with the tools that you work with or your concepts or ideas, is really important. And being pushed to grow and go beyond what you know, I think, can lead to breakthrough in a way.
Is there a conflict between this idea of naivety and proficiency?
In a certain sort of way there is, but I'd say it from this standpoint that in order for you to be a proper rebel, you have to know the rules. Or else you're just a rebel without a cause. Like if you know the rules, then you're purposely breaking them for a reason. And if you don't know the rules, there is that naive, but then you fall into this thing of you don't know whether or not that's been done before or not. You're just blindly just making music. But me personally, this is just my opinion, I like to learn as much as possible. I love information. I love to not only just listen to albums that have been done, but learn the backstories as to why someone did something and what was their reasoning behind it or lack thereof. So that then when I'm trying to be a rebel, but I have to have the rules in order to understand when I'm breaking them, or I can't flesh out. You have to have a skeleton in order to flesh out a body. There has to be some structure there, or else it's just a bunch of like flesh just moving around, is the best way that I could put it.
I mean, Matthew, you talked before about being intimidated by the piano, right? Because of the history of all this piano music. I mean, an analogy, I came through the sort of conservatory classical music environment, and some of my professors talked about how scary it was to write a string quartet because Beethoven did it really well. And there's also a sense like, well, who cares, Like, why do I have to be intimidated by the history of this thing? I mean, imagine a kid who's never seen a piano is put in a room with a piano. He's probably going to have this amazing experience, right? Because it makes cool sounds and he doesn't know anything about this history. Can you turn off this fear of the history? A fear of the great work that's been done before?
When I did this big band record, people said to me in interviews, oh, it's very old-fashioned to do something like a big band. And I thought, well, and I was sort of going, yeah, I suppose it is. And I was like, wait a minute, let's do the maths here. Like, how many big band albums have there been? And I don't know, I'm just going to make a number up. So let's say a few 100,000. And yet today, probably in terms of house music and electronic music, techno, things like that, there's probably that many pieces of music finished today. So actually, the whole sort of history of electronic music, or even though we've established that electronic doesn't really mean anything, but studio-based music, it's been condensed so hard now into that process. That the same thing, you now sit at a 909 and 808, and you're like, what can I possibly do with this? Because right now, if we get out a laptop and we open up and we sit here with an 808 and we try and write something original, our competition is there's now 829,312 other people with the same thing, trying to also find ways of being original with it. It sounds ridiculous, but when you have to do it day in, day out, it's like, okay, today I'm going to write like this, and I'm going to put it behind me, and I'm doing some pop writing with a friend of mine, And his technique is to get tape. He's like, you're playing too many notes. So he starts getting sellotape and tapes it around different fingers of the hand. It's just like, okay, now do something. And you're like, okay. But it's just, it sounds idiotic, but actually it's just ways to, when it's your job and you have to do it. Sometimes, for me, I always remember in 2006, I had a very big opportunity. I had at that time the biggest opportunity I had, which was write a piece of music to be performed on telly at this big concert, a celebration of British jazz, and with a big well-known collaborator. And at the time, it was the biggest opportunity I'd had, and it was being broadcast live on TV, and it was a big deal. And I was on tour in Australia at the time, and I had 3.5 hours to write it from start to finish. So you've got 3.5 hours. There's no room for failure. There's like a load of people that are waiting for that manuscript 3.5 years later. So it's manuscript as well. It's not just electronics. I've got to write it, arrange it, print it out, get it all ready. So if it takes sitting like this and drinking half a bottle of wine or getting a plant in or getting dressed up, whatever it is, it's like, okay, I've got to stop my brain thinking about that deadline and just instead just do the stuff.
We have about 10 minutes left. I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. Don't be shy.
Hi there, Marcelo. Thanks for all the beautiful insights. The question is, how original can one be? And are we talking about originality or authenticity?
It can be original all day. Everything is different. Every day is completely different. And people say, oh, everything under the sun has already been done, but that's bullshit. Like, this day hasn't happened. So you can figure out a new way to make those same, like, 3 chords sound completely different than what somebody else is doing and make it your own way and make it original, I don't like that thing of people saying, oh, you can't be original. You absolutely can be original in everything that you're doing every single day. The vibration will never, if one more person walks in this room, it changes the vibration of this room. So, like, I don't mean to be like metaphysical on you or anything like that, but, you can be completely different all the time. There's always room to be different.
But I think authenticity is a big issue as well in terms of the tools. I think one of the reasons why all these presets load up all these compressors and limiters is they're encouraging you to sound like the radio, or encouraging you to sound like something that already exists. And there's a kind of trap there as well. So I think authenticity, I know certainly when I started making music for the first time, when I was electronic music, I should say, that one of the great things I loved about the sampler was that it was a shortcut to authenticity, because I could sample I could sample a bit of some funk or something like that and call myself funky, you know what I mean? And honestly, it's a trap, and there's a whole political aspect to that as well that I think, there's a danger in authenticity, and we're being lured into it. We're being lured to conform, I think, the way that music has now become a soundtrack to rabid consumerism. So, one go.
Any more questions?
With presets and so on, I think maybe a lot of, especially young producers, want to hear a sound that they've heard before, because a lot of the questions are like, am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right track? And to hear the same sound that those guys are listening to gives them some confidence that, I'm making the right decisions. I'm sounding like what I want to hear in music that I listen to. And I guess my question is, how would those people go from that state into finding their own voice? How did you guys do that?
Because the preset will explain to you what the thing is doing. I think what I'm saying, and I don't know if everyone else agrees, but like when you first open it up and you're a new producer, the preset is going to show you, oh, now I know what a saw sounds like. Now I know what a sine sounds like. So then that should take you backwards to learning the thing so that you can create your own sound. So me being an educator, yeah, my students, when they first come in, that's exactly what they want. They want to press a button, know that they're on the right track to sounding like the producer that they're trying to sound like. Then I try to help them find their voice. And you need to design synth or program the synth that you choose so that you're finding your voice. You know, so it takes them in this backward motion of figuring out synths. I guess I'm just saying that if your music is totally constructed from presets, there's no way that you're going to be different from what everyone else has.
I guess to argue with you, no offense, but in a way, like a piano is a preset and massive, even if you program it, even if you go completely deep on massive and learn to use it properly and think it through and program your own sound, it's still a preset. They still designed half of your sound for you. I don't know if it's entirely a bad thing, and this idea of kids wanting to fit in. I mean, in dance music, you can't, if you make a dance record, no one's going to play it unless it fits in a set, which is part of why I don't really make dance records anymore.
I'd like to say something about presets as well, because I really love them. Like, I can program a synth, and I love programming synths as well, but presets are awesome, and they're so helpful. And I think a way that I learned to embrace presets and just adapt them to my needs, which saves a whole step of reinventing your wheel in a way, but to have an original sound is to have a performative process. So I use presets that are might be very producer-like, and I change them to be the way that I'd like them to be, sometimes not even that much at all. But I perform them, so instead it's something that might be a sound of an engineer, but I use it in a live, played and captured way. And it makes it very idiosyncratic. So finding a process to overcome the technology, I think, is great, whether it's like create your own synth presets or whatever, or to just find a way to put those sounds into a different context, whether it's through process or concept, it's an idea.
I really agree with you about this live thing, because your conscious brain is actually quite stupid compared to your subconscious. Like, you can, if I thought about it and tried to work it out, I couldn't drive a car or walk, but I can do those things. And the same when you play live, you're in a hurry. You don't have time to sort of overthink or to make generic choices, because you're just, I feel like my better self is the subconscious part, and that's...
I hope that answered you got some various answers to the question. Are there more?
Yeah.
Some in the back here.
Hello. If I write an idea and I know it's good and I know it's not finished, so I kind of go through this battle of whether I should put it out, because I want to keep the flow of putting work out there, because I have definitely got caught into the trap of never feeling like anything is finished and never putting it out. So my question is twofold. When is something finished, and how do you keep up with the flow of putting your work out and not just keeping it all to yourself and being a hoarder of work that to you is never either good enough or finished?
To me, it's finished when you feel as though it represents you, or you got the emotion out. And again, I go back to this thing of artists not wanting to commit, you know, on a bunch of different levels, and then being scared of criticism or how people look at them, or we're all so sensitive, and I'm just not that way. I enjoy people's criticism. Like he said, he wants to argue, and I'm like, great, I love arguments. Like, and I love to put out music and have people critique it or criticize it. It does not hurt my ego or my consciousness, or like, if you're just like, hey, I like vanilla ice cream and I like chocolate ice cream. Hey, well then let's go get a beer, you know? Like, you know, if I'm strong enough, but that deals with the person. Like, I love to put it out and for people to say something about it, and I drew an emotion from you. You know, and it doesn't, I don't know, it's you could sit and tweak music forever, but at some point you're gonna have to commit, and you're gonna have to turn it in or put it out. You know, when I say turn it in, I'm speaking old school terms, like to the record company. Nowadays it doesn't exist, right? Just hit the upload button, like just put it out to the world. Otherwise you're gonna become like Vivian Maier, and it's just gonna be like, we're gonna discover all these thousands of negatives of photographs like after you die. And it's like, what's the purpose of that? You know, the music is for people, put it out.
I think we probably have time for, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think as well, just to add to that, I think one of the big myths of the music industry as well is that music is a product. It's not, it's a process. And you speak to any band, anyone that plays live, and they'll tell you that it's not until they've played the record on tour for a year or two after the record's come out where you finally understand what the thing is that you made, and then's the time that you should record the record. But the whole thing is constantly evolving, and the only reason the idea of finished is, in a way, is for that sort of record business model, you know, where, I mean, you look at classical music and there's a score and there's millions and millions of interpretations of that score, you know, it's never finished. You know, Mahler's Fifth Symphony is never finished because it's constantly interpreted by other people. So it's a process, and you just need to surrender to that process, really.
I think we probably have time for one more somewhat fast question. Yeah, one here. Can we get a mic? Oh, back, sorry. I overpromised.
Hi, I have a quick question. Sometimes you are working really hard on something and you make a mistake, and some friend of yours comes and says, dude, that's wonderful. How do you stand about errors and accepting the fact that sometimes something you're creating just is beyond you somehow?
D.H. Lawrence talks about the act of writing, and he said that it's me and the wind that blows through me. And I think it's a very elegant way of putting it, which is like I don't know about you guys, but for me, the best work that I think that I've done, I'd be hard-pressed to tell you how exactly it happened. And it happens maybe, I can think of maybe 3 or 4 times where I've been like, okay, that's just come to, that's something that's just appeared, and I couldn't tell you where exactly how it got there or what decisions I made. And normally it's very fast. And normally the piece of music's finished in an hour and a half. And so I think it's this idea of surrender again, you know, about maybe abandoning your conscious self, as James said, or maybe it's about trying to sort of turn off.
And if it got a great result, then is it really a mistake? What you're doing is putting a negative connotation on mistake. So it's really something that was a result of what you didn't intend to do, which is a great thing, you know? And then you already got the thing. You got the emotional response from someone else. They were like, I really like this. So then that's great. I love mistakes that come like that. A majority of my music is that way, you know? And it's a great thing to me.
So I think we can close there. Once more, thanks so much to Matthew Herbert, James Holden, Young Guru, and Phoebe Kiddo.